heal as a team, we're going to crumble. Inch by inch, play by play, till we're finished. We're in hell right now, gentlemen, believe me. And we can stay here, get the shit kicked out of us, or we can fight our way back into the light. We can climb out of hell. 1 inch at a time. You know, when you get old in life, things get taken from you. I mean, that's part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw our fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's going to make the fucking difference between winning and losing. Between living and dying. I'll tell you this, in any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's going to win that inch. And I know if I'm going to have any life anymore, it's because I'm still willing to fight and die for that inch. Because that's what living is. There's 6 inches in front of your face. Now I can't make you do it. You got to look at the guy next to you. Look into his eyes. Now I think you're going to see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're going to see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're going to do the same for him. That's the team, gentlemen. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals.
Ideas are bulletproof.
Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. It is November 23rd, 2011. This is Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com. Today I'm joined by my good buddy, Bob Tuskin.
What's up?
He's going to hang out with me, and we're just going to cover a few news articles, and I want Bob's thoughts on a few things. First thing, though, I'd like to do is I'd like to give everybody something to be thankful about for this coming Thanksgiving, and I know this made me smile last night, so I just thought you'd like to know. You might have heard me play this clip on Joe's show, but I'll play it again.
Former U.S. President George Bush and his former counterpart Tony Blair were found guilty of war crimes by the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, which held a 4-day hearing in Malaysia. The 5-panel tribunal unanimously decided that Bush and Blair committed genocide and crimes against peace and humanity when they invaded Iraq in 2003 in blatant violation of international law. The judges ruled that war against Iraq by both the former heads of states was a flagrant abuse of law and an act of aggression which amounted to a mass murder of the Iraqi people.
Bush and Blair are found guilty under the same law that applied to the Nazis after the end of World War II. So they are international criminals guilty of Nuremberg crimes against peace, and they should be prosecuted by any state in the world that gets a hold of them. And we will continue our efforts to bring Bush and Blair to justice and put them in jail.
In their verdict, the judges said that the United States, under the leadership of Bush, forged documents to claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. They further said the findings of the tribunal be made available to members of the Rome Statute and the names of Bush and Blair be entered into a war crimes register.
There is also a recommendation
that this be circulated to states, because all states have universal jurisdiction. And therefore, whenever Bush or Blair appear within their shores, there is an obligation under international law to commit these criminals, international war criminals, through the justice system.
Both Bush and Blair have repeatedly said the so-called war against terror was targeted at terrorists. Lawyers and human rights workers who are present here today say that the verdict by the tribunal is a landmark decision, and the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal say that they would persuade and lobby with the International Criminal Court to charge former US President George Bush and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair for war crimes charges.
Happy Thanksgiving, ladies and gentlemen. At least we can be thankful this year, because now, it doesn't matter if it was in Kuala Lumpur or here, they have been officially found by a court guilty of war crimes. Therefore, that is against them. Now, certain countries, they will not be able to travel to, just like Kissinger. So, it's a start. It's not, it's not perfect, but it's a start. What do you think, Bob?
Is it just for Tony Bush and George Blair?
Yeah, I just think it's for Blair and Bush. I don't think they put Cheney involved in there, although they should have.
Well, they could have thrown a few other figures in that list there. I wonder sometimes if they are used as puppets and they receive all the attention to distract from the more sinister, influential people in the background.
That's a good, kind of like a front man, like a fall guy.
Yeah, because although I think they're scumbags, and there's no doubt.
Oh, I don't think they are. They're not the architects. No way.
Yeah, so
they're not that smart.
I have mixed feelings about this, but since we're being thankful, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that there are some agencies out there that are willing to take a stand like that against these criminals, and I hope they do it against other criminals. And part of this was, the fact that they can't use 9/11 anymore to justify what they have done. That was one of the findings, that a lot of this was done in the name of September 11th, 2001. And I think that right there is the next level of trying these war criminals for being completely complicit in a sense, or at the very least using September 11th to exploit and kill and so many other of the consequences from their false flag terror.
I agree. That's why it's a linchpin. Because if we can expose how that was a lie, then everything that followed suit will be exposed as a lie and exposed as unnecessary and done for the wrong reasons, and therefore give us more reason to disband things like the Department of Homeland Security. Adolf Hitler was the last person to use the word homeland. That should make people wonder. Why does DHS act like the Nazi SS? It's actually like the SA. It's not like the SS. They're more like the SA, the brown shirts. And we all know what happened to the brown shirts. At least anybody that's a student of history knows what happened to the brown shirts. Bob, if you became president tomorrow, would you disband the DHS? Not just TSA, but like DHS in general.
That's not the only thing I would disband. I'd start there, and maybe I wouldn't start there. I don't know. The role of the president is something that, again, I think takes too much of the spotlight. If I was to become sheriff, which is something a little bit more closer to home here, Popeye, I tell you, I'd kick out the Department of Homeland Security for my community. I'd kick out the IRS for my community. I'd kick out all these nanny state federal bureaucracies from my community. And I think that's a more feasible place to start. So the answer to your question is yes. It's like asking me if I'd get rid of the Gestapo. It's no different. And the NSA is something that I'd get rid of, because the NSA is the agency that nobody likes to talk about. One of the 3-letter acronyms that hardly gets mentioned. NSA, folks, remember that. They are in tune to everything.
I agree. The NSA's got its little dirty fingers everywhere. They're the ones that collect everything. I suggest you guys look up Echelon. Little thing that's been going on between the UK and the US for 20 years. Very, very interesting. Monitoring all phone calls, email. Real nice. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stay tuned. Bob Tuskin and more when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. I'm going to try to bring my guest up here. I have a special guest this evening. I'm going to try to bring her up. We've been having some technical difficulties getting her on, so I'm going to try to bring her up right now. Her name is Carolyn Goyda. She's a investigative journalist and a radio show host. She got a show over on Blog Talk, but she's an investigative journalist, and she's got a very interesting story in her own right. And she interviewed Judith Very Baker yesterday, so right before I did, and she had a lot of the same technical difficulties I had interviewing Judith. So I'm trying to get her on, but I will get her on. We were having, she was, because she's staying in a hotel right now, and they were messing with her. They took the hotel's internet offline for 2 hours yesterday. It was just crazy. So I wasn't the only person that had issues with getting Carolyn on the line, or getting Judith on the line yesterday, and I only got 25 minutes with her, but Carolyn's going to be gracious enough to send me her audio from her interview with her, and I'm going to mix them together and make a new another interview with Judith and get it out there. And if anybody heard me on Bob Tuskin's show yesterday, I said, go get Judith's book, go get Ed Haslam's book, Dr. Mary's Monkey. It's completely worth it. And I swear you will not be sorry. In fact, let me get the full name of Judith's book is Me and Lee: How I Came to Know, Love, and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald. And I'll even give you the ISBN number off of it. It is, there's two of them. There's ISBN 13 and ISBN 10. I'll give you I like 13, so we'll go with that one. ISBN 13 is 978-097-9988-677. You can get it from Trine Day, but honestly, if you just go to Judith's website, I think it's judithverrybakerblogspot.com. You can get it. Just go to meandlee.com, and there's a link to Judith's personal blog, and then you can get the book from there. I suggest you buy it. Excellent, excellent read. I'm going to see if I can try to get Carolyn back on here again. Give me a sec, guys. But, yeah, get that book. I'm trying to work on getting Ed Haslam back on again. Remember, a couple months ago I had Ed Haslam back, or I had Ed on originally. He broke some... never before heard news on the show in reference to the polio vaccine and the tainted vaccines. During my interview with Judith yesterday, I learned that, and I had heard some of this in the research, and I thought it was just these were older vaccines that they had stockpiled and they were just using, and it turns out that's not what they were doing. These vaccines were actually still being manufactured, even though they were tainted with the candidate. So it wasn't an accidental thing like, we accidentally had it, and these were older vaccines that were stockpiled. That's not what happened. What actually happened was they were continuously making the vaccine, knowing it was contaminated the way they were making it. And it was just not good at all. in any way, shape, or form. And I thought that, it was this old stockpiled vaccine, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit when she said that they were still making it. Not that I didn't think that they would do that. It's just it never dawned on me that they were still, up until the 90s they were making it. So Lord knows if anything that they've got stockpiled now still has it. Oh, let's hope not. We can hope in one hand, and how does it go? Wish in one hand and crap in the other, and tell me which one weighs more. So if there is stuff, Carolyn, are you with me?
Yeah, boy, we're having all.
Finally, yeah, it's been kind of hectic. I was telling my listeners here what you went through with Judith yesterday.
Yeah, and it sounds like we're still having problems because all of a sudden the phones are being blocked, and I cannot open up your website at all. I can't. I couldn't even go to Orion. Nothing would go through. So I guess we must have made the wrong people angry, which is a good sign.
That doesn't surprise me. That's okay. We got a few minutes before we go into break. Go ahead and tell the listeners, just give them a quick, brief intro about who you are, and then on the other side of the break, we can get into Judith's interview, the cancer research, and I want to get into a little bit of what you've been through so they can hear, some of the stuff that you've uncovered and been through. Because, your personal story about what you've uncovered and been through was amazing itself. You should write a book. So go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, if I write a book, it'll probably be like a Stephen King sitcom, because you got the ups and downs whenever you get involved with things. But I guess just briefly, I don't like to talk about myself, but brief intro, anything good about me is due to my late parents who never got a chance at great education, but were the best read people, never missed a vote, actively and were involved. There wasn't a sheeple cell and bone in their body or anybody else in my family. I was lucky that way, my aunts and uncles and my parents. My dad had the kind of life, and my mom too, that, the synchronicity and the things that went on is just amazing. Their lives each are a book. Other than that, I've done a few interesting things. I worked at McDonnell Douglas for quite a few years, over a decade. I worked on just about every program they had in the astronautics division. I worked on everything from the space programs to the weapons to the airplanes to the commercial stuff to the software to black projects. And I was everything from a senior design engineer to senior estimator of various project managers. And I was the artificial intelligence fellow, though it was sometimes more artificial than intelligent, and I was not a fellow. And I had the pleasure of going to the Soviet Union when Chernobyl happened. I happened to be there on a cultural exchange, so I glow in the dark, so I save on having a nightlight. And other than that, I was the original producer of Veritas Radio, and I was assistant producer on Out There TV, if anybody remembers that. I also have helped out on Robin Falco's show on Rumor Mill News, and I've written for various people, everything from Paul Harvey to a little bit with Bob Chapman and some other folks. And other than that, I'm trying to move right now. I'm going to try to get a sanctuary built, and we're going to have a lot of permaculture. We're going to have hydroponics, aeroponics, and some just the regular aquaponics with the fish and everything. And I'm excited about that, and I've got 2 patents in the work. And if they work, we can all have a sanctuary, because one of them involves, instead of a wind turbine, it's more of a vibrational thing, which I want to design this as cheaply as possible and get it out to everybody. Same thing, I have a flexible film type photovoltaic thing that if we get the patent, we're going to put that out, because I strongly believe that what we need to do is be able to control our own destiny through controlling our own fuel and our own food. And because what the 1%, the elite, whatever we want to call them this week, they want to control the funding, the food, and the fuel, and that's how they got you by the short hairs. And we need to break that bond and basically stand up for each other, vote, do jury duty, and everybody needs to wake up one sheeple per day and make one stranger smile every day, and the world will be a better place.
I agree. We only got a second or two here before the break comes up. In fact, there's the music. So on the other side, we'll get into your investigative journalism, the research that you've done, and some of the scary stuff that you've uncovered. And because of that, you've been targeted and stuff. And I believe the more light we shed on your your little plight, the safer you are. So we'll go for it. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're back in a few minutes. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. It is November 23rd, 2011. This is the, I guess you could say, pre-Thanksgiving show, or episode, rather, of Down the Rabbit Hole, the day before Thanksgiving of 2011. And I'm joined by a very interesting lady who, I gotta say, I when I was on her show earlier today, I told her she's got a brass set of balls that wouldn't fit in a dump truck. Carolyn, go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit, or actually as much as you want. You got the floor. We got about 10 minutes for the next break, so the floor is yours. Go ahead and tell the listeners about the stuff that you uncovered in your local area, and then, you know, all the price you pretty much paid for what, you know, for standing up and doing the right thing.
Sure, I appreciate that. Well, you know what? It's been an interesting odyssey. It's definitely been full of roller coaster ups and downs because some of it started, this goes back over 5 years. I actually, after working at McDonnell Douglas, I took some time to take care of my dad at home because I didn't feel, I think people, if you can, you don't want to put them in these dog kennel nursing homes. So we took care of Dad at home, and that's one of the things I'm most proud of because he was bedridden for 5 years, bladder and bowel incontinent, no Foley, and didn't get a single bed sore. So when you put your mind to it, there's no reason why people that are disabled have to be sick or hurt. There are ways to deal with it. So anybody ever needs help with that, look me up on Facebook and I'll help you. The thing started, it was really kind of interesting because, you know, I was never one of these people that knew how to keep my mouth shut, but neither was my dad. Because when I worked out at McDonnell Douglas, we had the situation where during the first Gulf War, I had the audacity, as they put it, to speak up and actually got myself on the layoff list, which was fine. I actually was ready to move because I didn't like the changes that were happening in the company once they started tying it together with Boeing. Basically, the banksters basically took over the company with a $4 billion stranglehold, saying that they owed when they were building the A-12, and then Cheney came in there and shut it off, and then basically they said it was illegal. During the Gulf War, I was actually sitting in headquarters in a meeting with the new president that the banks had installed. And if people don't think there's connections with these military-industrial complex and the banksters, it was really interesting because I had met John McDonald, and he actually was a pretty decent guy. And this was the son of the original founder. I met the founder only once, and he had actually come around to being a pretty interesting person himself. He actually was putting money in brain research, and I have a feeling it was remote viewing because they had a little bit of that going on when I was there. When John McDonald, the son, took over from the nephew, who the board of directors gave it to the nephew, who they thought was more establishment. Well, John turned out to be a really interesting guy, and he wanted to broaden McDonnell Douglas out into other things and whatnot. And he had a very progressive look on things. He was not going to follow the party line or the military-industrial complex line. So they decided to get rid of him. So they brought in a hatchet man that basically took McDonnell Douglas just in St. Louis from 150,000 to 50,000 people. And I had a nice, comfortable position. Like I said, I'd gotten selected as artificial intelligence fellow, which sent me up to MIT for training and all kinds of things, which were interesting. And we can always talk about that someday. Because I saw some things up there that need to be out in the public that they haven't released as far as technology. It's just amazing. And but during the Gulf War, I actually had been working on some mission planning and battle management stuff, and came in because two guys were very excited because there'd been a dogfight, and they were F-18s in the dogfight, which obviously were McDonnell Douglas aircraft, and they had won the dogfight because everybody always wondered about them doing good or bad in a dogfight. They're not the F-15, which is the Air Force fighter. You know, this is the Navy strike bomber, so people were proud that it had actually won in its dogfight. So somebody brought it up in the meeting, and somebody happened to ask me a question because I'd actually had something to do with some of the mission planning, and I really couldn't go into a lot of detail, but I said, well, I was just glad to see that these, you know, the men and women that were on that particular flight coming back home, I said, that's the way we want it to be. I said, I'm not so sure this war is the way it should be anyway, because I said, you know, this whole thing has been bullshit from the beginning, you know, with April doing what she was doing as ambassador, and it was basically sucking them in there. And there's a lot of stuff about those wars I can tell you, too, if you ever want to get into that. The Falkland Wars, too. I almost got shot by a Royal Marine. Got me to meet Maggie Thatcher, though. But it was interesting because the guy was sitting there, and after I got saying how we were so glad to have at least our pilots come home, even if we didn't believe in this particular adventure, all of a sudden the guy stood up and was telling me that, oh, you don't know what business is, little girl. And I'm like, excuse me? I've been up all night working on this, and I just saw the pictures. I know what just happened. And he says, oh, well, you don't understand. This is business. And I got to admit, I had been up all night, didn't have enough sense to keep my mouth shut. So I stood up. That's how angry I was. And I asked him if he'd ever wore a uniform except for a maid uniform in one of his trysts someplace. And I said, I bet you weren't even a Boy Scout. You know, I said, you've never worn a uniform. You've never put your life on the line for anybody else. I said, my father was decorated on D-Day. And I said, you know, he was one of the guys who took even the Germans down to Los Alamos during the war and refused to stay, went back and went with his unit because he refused to participate. And I said, you don't know what sacrifice is. My dad's buddy died after the war from the beatings the Nazis had given him in his kidneys. And I said, I don't want to see any of our people get kidnapped or shot down. And he proceeded to give me the lecture about how, well, hey, this is business. We don't make any money if they don't get shot down because we can't sell any more. You know, we don't lose them. You can't sell them, you know. And I got myself on my reply, which I won't repeat on the air, got me put on the layoff list. But it took them 2 weeks to get the guts to do it. And I actually had lunch with John McDonald, who told me himself he could not stop me from getting fired for my reply. But so I that just gives you an idea that when it comes to things that matter, I am going to speak up no matter what it costs. And in my own neighborhood, I had started, one thing was just a light thing. We actually were looking for an old Nazi Bund site that was near our house. My mom had seen it as a kid. These guys used to come out on the streetcars and in their cars out to the county. And this was both after and during the war. Okay, these people were coming out there in this Nazi Bund, and this was like the Bohemian Grove, Big Owl. My mom was describing this to me, and I'm like going, oh, my God, I got to get a hold of Alex Jones over this. They got this big owl thing, and then she's talking about the rituals and people in capes and people running around naked and everything else. And she told me how her dad, my grandpa, actually had caught her and the other kids watching and swatted her in the butt and said, don't go near these people. And believe it or not, these included people like, as in George, the Walker family, as in George Walker Bush. The Walkers are very big in St. Louis. And the Anheuser family, as in Anheuser-Busch. And also Charles Lindbergh was there, speaking out in favor of the Nazis. Henry Ford was there. And ironically, my mom and I were looking for this, and we're talking 50 years after the war. And when we tried to find out from the local Afton Historical Society, really not telling anybody else, we went there with a metal detector to see if we could find anything. Believe it or not, that's when originally the first death threats started, telling us not to look into this and to mind our own business. So obviously, you know, these Bunds don't disappear. These guys are still, these Nazi cultists are still here, and they're still running the show with the, you know, they've so infiltrated in NASA through Project Paperclip and whatnot. But after that, I decided I didn't have enough trouble, so I got involved when St. Louis County, I found out, had secretly sold our water company to Bayer Pharmaceutical. And they what they've been doing, and Bayer and Siemens and a couple other ones, and they're basically just the same companies, and they're swapping these facilities back and forth, and they're hiding them in 2 or 3 layers of subsidiaries. They're buying up county utilities and city utility waters and whatnot. And what they're doing is they're throwing away the filters and putting in more chemicals. So you're getting not only the disgusting chemicals, you're getting, you know, partially dead, partially mutated now bacteria and everything else because these chemicals are having a field day. And I wrote a thing up. Nobody in St. Louis would touch it. Nobody in the paper would touch it. Somebody whose big radio show comes out of there wouldn't touch it either. And who touched it was Paul Harvey. He put it on the air, and he was disgusted to see what was happening. He says, "Wait, you know." And my what I wrote for him was that, you know, why are we having somebody that doesn't even live in the same state control the water? I want somebody locally whose family's going to be drinking the water, making the decisions about the quality of the water. And we shouldn't have to think we need to go buy water out of a plastic bottle when we should have the right to have fresh water. If that's what the tax money built, you should be able to trust your tap water. We shouldn't have to worry about whether it's got fluoride or other chemicals. And boy, I tell you, the statistics that came out, there's so much estrogen in the water. It's no wonder that Viagra is selling like crazy. I'm not surprised every guy doesn't need it. And between the estrogen and the birth control pills and the menopause treatments and what's in the chicken and the cows and the pigs, and basically just gets whizzed out. And then you add the chemicals that people are taking, the Oxycontin and the metals and stuff that are in there. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it screws with the health, and they're turning men into little girls. It's disgusting. I'm going to cut you off right there, Carolyn, because the break's coming up. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. You don't want to miss any of this interview. I'm telling you, Carolyn is one of the most interesting people I've ever met, so stay tuned. More with her in just a few minutes. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. And I see Carolyn is now in the chat room, so she can chat with everybody. Carolyn, you were getting into the nitty gritty of what you were, stumbled upon there in Missouri.
Yeah,
and from my conversations with you, you ran into not just some good old boy boss hog type network, but you ran into the hardcore Satanists that didn't want you talking about what you had uncovered. So go right ahead. You got about another 10 minutes before we go to a top of the hour break, so the floor is yours, my dear.
All righty. Just to wrap up the last thing about the
before you do that, make sure you turn off that Skype popping noise. It's going to kill me.
All right, how do I? You'll have to tell me.
It's in the chat. It's in Popeye's chat. Popeye, why do you have to have your chat make that noise, huh? My chat does the same thing, by the way. I'm just.
Oh, okay.
There's a little button there. You should be able to find it. Let's see. Mine's no longer on.
It's a volume. If you look in the chat there on the bottom, Carolyn, you'll see a little envelope. You'll see a little envelope in the bottom left corner. Next to it is a little speaker. If you click on that, the sound will go away. You don't have to hear that click, click, click in the background anymore.
Okay, is that okay now? I think that must
perfect.
Okay. Well, are we still on the air now, right? Okay.
Yeah, go right ahead. Pick up where you want to finish off where you dropped off at the break.
Yeah, I want to tell everybody that's listening to. This is something that they can do, because I always not just like to talk about the negative. I like to talk about the solutions too. So I like to tell everybody, first of all, don't be doing the bottled water. You're crazy to do that. If you're going to do that, get yourself one decent thermos, one decent glass thermos, or get a steel thermos, something healthy. Don't be using these plastic bottles. That's goofy. And that was actually part of the agenda, because when I talked to the people at the water company, they can legally do this to you now, because they're no longer part of. You have no right to water, okay? And people think you do, but you don't. It doesn't matter if it was built by tax money or not. Once they sell it and it's privatized, you do not have the right to it. And their argument is you can go buy bottled water, or go pour buckets in your toilet. But of course, if you live in any urban area, they can then condemn your house. So it's another way to abuse you. But everybody really does need to become aware of what's in their water, because if you're in an urban area, it really sucks, because if you're like St. Louis, it's full of hospitals, it's full of allied chemicals. We have Monsanto, we have Mallinckrodt. The stuff they dump is just outrageous, and they don't even try to filter that out of the water. And since they've gotten rid of a lot of filters, there's even more stuff. And using the chemicals, it's causing a lot more mutagens and what bacteria and germs are in there. And realize, especially if you have a lot of major hospitals in the area, whatever everybody's doing is going to get in that water supply, and that includes their medications, from everything from, Oxycontin to Prozac, and of course, they want to overfluoride us, and now they're even talking about putting lithium. So I would definitely have, some sort of atmospheric water generator, have a Berkey, have something, but also, have a little filter on your thing. But everybody has a right, I believe, to demand good water. So I think people need to get together and have their water tested, and get all your friends together and complain and say, we want healthy water out of our tap. We shouldn't have to go to extremes to simply drink water. I mean, that's just insanity. And people have allowed it to happen, just like they do at the airport. If you're willing to grab your ankles, they're more than willing to do it, and people got to stand up and say no. Now, the other thing we had gotten into after we looked into the Nazi Bund and stuff, and we basically decided to heck with it. We don't need to find this thing. They're going to harass us over this and give us death threats about trying to find the location of something 50 years ago. So, I was dealing with this, and after my dad passed, because he was bedridden for 5 years, I was fixing up the house and tried to get involved, because I had invested well enough that I had some time that I could do some things. And I'm one of these people, I've got to get involved in a positive way to fix things. And my dad was that way. Everybody would turn to him. Same thing with my mom. And people in the neighborhood. It's one of these, subdivisions, which I would never really choose to live in, but my mom loved the house, and it was her first owned home, so it meant a lot to her, and we had done a lot and had a lot of plants and whatnot. And I got involved first with the subdivision because I found out, and this is actually something a lot of people don't know about, that all these government entities now, all these things are becoming like fiefdoms across the United States. And St. Louis County is as bad as the worst part of Chicago or anywhere else. It's very much a political machine. And they're creating these municipal ordinances like crazy out there. And they use that to run people out of their homes. They use that to extort money out of people. And they like to target women alone. They like to target elderly. They like to target people on fixed income, because if they can pressure you enough, get you in debt, you can't pay your taxes, they can get your house. Plus, a lot of people are using those to blackmail people, because they'll get all these anonymous hotlines that you can report your neighbor for this or that, and the next thing you know, you're getting in trouble for having, a gutter that's hanging loose or a crack here or there. Next thing you know, you got a $1,500 fine. And what I found out, and it's been used against me, I tried to stop them from doing it because they use that to target people and also to extort money. But what happens is they can take you to these kangaroo courts. You're not allowed a jury. It's like a ticket. You're considered guilty unless you can prove otherwise. And basically, you walk in there and all they're basically saying is, well, you really don't want a jury trial, or we can give you up to a year in jail. So everybody just throws their hands up and pays the fine or pleads guilty and gets an SIS, and the county makes money. And the lawyers don't complain, because the few people that have the money to buy, it's like all these roadside stops that are handing out all these violations. Lawyers aren't going to fight it. They make a boatload of money off these little kangaroo courts, and they're part of the pampered and shielded, so they're not in a hurry to get rid of it. So that was one thing that was causing me problems, because my subdivision was involved with basically doing a heck of a lot of extortion and targeting people that they didn't like in our neighborhood. And since we always were the house that people came to before with my dad, they kept coming there, and I never had the sense to say no to anybody. That was one of the things that was a problem. And then I was baptized Greek Orthodox or Ukrainian Catholic in the Greek Rite, but the Roman Catholic Church had shut all our churches. It was one of the things they did when the Ukrainians were being slaughtered by Stalin. The church said, well, that's okay, we'll steal your churches now because you don't have anybody to defend you. And so we wound up I went to Roman Catholic schools, and how that is important is that I was a very small one. It was it was probably 8 girls in the whole class. I can't remember how many in the total class, maybe 50. But all of a sudden I remember there were 2 boys that kind of disappeared, and I found out they'd had all kinds of legal problems. And we had a reunion I didn't go to, but I'd heard that they said, oh, that you didn't show up, and neither did the 2 jailbirds. And I'm like, what the heck? I knew these guys. What happened, So I actually tried to contact one of them to see what was going on, and found out that both of these guys had been molested. The infamous pedophile priest deal. And I actually started looking into it more, and I wanted this to stop. I said, this is ridiculous, because I remember my mom had become one of these little white slave kids, because, when they didn't have black kids anymore, a lot of these counties, and St. Louis County was good for this, what they would do is they'd find poor families, and they'd get somebody to say, oh, well, they don't have the money to feed the kids. And they used to do this all the time. Unsolved Mysteries used to report on these families getting back together, and everybody'd say, well, this is weird. How did the sheriff, it didn't make sense. The sheriff would come take these kids. This was really common across the Midwest, in Missouri and St. Louis County. They'd come and get these kids, put them in what they call an orphanage. My mom was in the one that was called the Evangelical Orphanage in North St. Louis. And I've met other people that have since been there. Almost all the kids were molested. It was rare if they weren't, including my uncle was molested. So, I was aware that, there was bizarre things going on. We're talking about back in the teens and the 20s in St. Louis and the 30s. And my research went back even farther. But like my mom's case, of course, she was a stinker. She kept running away. My uncle, the poor guy, he had been molested. And this is how they sold these kids. They actually would have people come and bid on them. My mom kept running away, so she wasn't worth bidding on. They actually wound up letting her go back home. My oldest aunt got farmed out as a migrant worker, and they all lived in like bunkers, never got to go to school. And then the other one, she got lucky. She got farmed out to somebody that owned a hairdresser place. He just wanted a kind of a girl to be a flunky, but also she didn't have a kid, so she actually doted on her, so she got lucky. And then, but my uncle, obviously he was with the boys section. He couldn't see his 3 sisters. He's all alone. He gets molested. Believe it or not, St. Louis had an infamous insane asylum, and they did horrible things in research, and it was very similar to what happened to the one Kennedy girl. My uncle got selected. One of the doctors came there and bought 8 of the boys, and he said, we need somebody depressed. We're doing a study on depression, and what they did is he wound up getting that partial lobotomy, just like one of those Kennedys. Was it Kathleen Kennedy, I think it was? And so, I mean, this stuff has been going on, and when I started getting into the research, I mean, it was amazing when I was getting into, because what they were doing was using those kids' school books. You know how everybody used to have to get their picture taken every year and it'd be in the school book? Well, what they do is it was basically like a menu for these sick pedophiles. They'd use these books, pick out a kid, and it was a perfect scam. Because now it wasn't just, Harney Toad Priest having a problem. What this was is these fundraisers that were donating to the church, or the same people, and they didn't even have the same religion. They didn't care. They were donating to the church, donating to the local politicians, which then brings in the corrupt police and the media who are getting paid off. But what they were doing was they would select a kid, and the kid would be invited to be an altar boy for the coming retreat, which would run for a week, maybe a weekend, or even just a Saturday. But, here's a family, and they were smart. They were choosing mostly poor kids, or, lower middle class kids. And, the family's like, oh, you got to go do this.
You know what? I'm going to have to cut you off right there, Carolyn, because we're coming up to the top of the hour break.
Okay.
When we come back on the other side, I'm going to have you, I'll have you pick up right where you're being forced to leave off. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be back in a few minutes with hour number 2, Carolyn Goyda. And my good friend Bob Tuskin, who's hanging out ever so patiently and quietly in the background and playing Mr. Producer. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for hour number 2 of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye, from FederalJack.com. Hanging out with my good buddy Bob Tuskin tonight, and my special guest, Carolyn Goyda. Now, Carolyn, before you got cut off by the break, you were getting into the dirty, foul details. Is the only way I could describe these pedophiles, and you were describing what was going on. Let me ask you a question. Was this just from what you found in Missouri, or was it spread further? Obviously, I know it's all over, but this was the same network, obviously, correct? I just want to make sure that,
this is extremely organized and extremely orchestrated. They know exactly what they're doing. Some of these kids are swapped across state lines, so, where is this so-called federal FBI and everybody else that should be supposedly doing something? What I've discovered, this has actually been going on. I know for a fact, I didn't keep going back any farther. I went back, and I could prove it back at least 100 years that this has been organized. And they literally do pick these kids out. And this is, obviously, they didn't have the photo books all the way back, but they would actually pick these kids out, and kids would disappear, and they would, tell their parents the kids are getting selected. All kinds of ways to do it. To tell the kids getting special training, or they would convince the kid that they had to go join the seminary or something else, and they would get these kids, and these kids would be being swapped between Boston, San Francisco, New York, Milwaukee, and internationally. Some of these kids were going back and forth between Ireland. Germany was a hotbed of a lot of this stuff. I mean, there's no other way to put it than satanic. I mean, it is just disgusting, because you just have to be, because a lot of these kids, I mean, the kids actually, they not only committed suicide over the stress and the horror of what was going on, but also, they were actually sacrificing some of these kids. There was no doubt about it, because what I found out, there was every 20, 30 years, it seemed like there was a scandal where they slipped up a little bit, because like the one before my mom's, there was another orphanage, and it became notorious and it became so notorious because they were getting sloppy. It was in the teens and the 20s, with the roaring 20s. These guys were, having this heyday with all the money before the crash that was orchestrated. They were bringing these kids, and they were so open that these guys just came straight to the orphanage and was attacking these kids there. And that got out because, kids started to run away and everything else, and people saw these big cars pulling up. There were a few cars there were back then. There was mostly street cars. So if you had a car, it was a big deal. And it was just amazing because when the woman, they were going to bring her up on charges. You can go back and see it in the old St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the now defunct St. Louis Globe-Democrat. The articles about this, and it was like a sensational trial was about to happen, and when she supposedly suicided herself, you know how that happens. Like remember the madam that Alex had on for a while that
Deborah Jean Palfrey.
After she gets done telling she'll never commit suicide, they find her. Oh well, of course we assume it's suicide. Like a woman is going to hang herself in a garage, right? But yeah, this stuff has been, and it's very organized, and they were able to use, and it's not just the Catholic Church either; it's other churches too. Because I mean, a lot these fundraisers don't believe in any church, and that's why some of these things people say, oh, it's the Jews who do this, it's the Jesuits who do this, it's the it's the Christians, it's the Catholics, it's the everybody wants to point at everything, but that's just part of the distraction, diversion, and divide everybody up. Because if they can get the herd to cull itself into manageable sized ghettos of fear and bigotry and stupidity, it makes their job a hell of a lot easier. And so I found out it was across the board. It didn't matter. Some of these guys were going to these religious treats that were Catholic, but they were WASPs, or they were. They could have been Jewish or whatever, or basically, let's be honest, most of them don't believe in anything except. I really do. There's so many of these people that do get into the ritualistic aspect of this, that they're so into this stuff with the young kids, because there's so much of that. The energy around these young kids seem to attract these, these, I don't know, you want to call them lecherous creatures. I don't know if they can still be considered human beings for what they do. I don't know if David Icke is right that any of these people are reptilian, but they sure have hell been interbreeding so much that most of them are imbeciles anyway. But there's definitely something there that these people are selling their soul, because I don't see how they can do what they do to these kids. And, when they finally, after she committed suicide, somebody went in there and they dug it up, and there was so many bodies, and that they could show that there was, torture done to these kids. And there was no other way to say, but it was ritual, sacrifices that were going on. But it swept under the table. She committed suicide. Nothing to see here. Move along. Everything's gone now. And they would just go set up a new house somewhere, or, like I said, build another school for boys, And for some reason, they really seemed to like to pick on the boys. It seemed like, like my mom had got molested, but it was more like the orderly types who were just taking advantage of the kids that were coming in. And I know that the girls also do too. And St. Louis, even today, is just unbelievable. And the good cops know it, but they can't do anything about it because it's so corrupt on top. Because it involves the top levels. They got their own goon squad. That's who I've had to deal with. And we'll get into that, because I tell you, these guys, they don't care anything about civil rights. They don't care anything about the Bill of Rights or property rights or anything. But, what they do, and, people heard about it a couple years ago. Remember that one boy who was about 14 or 12? He actually couldn't stand watching the other little 5-year-old getting picked up off of a little rural county road in southern Illinois, which is about 10 minutes from St. Louis. And he actually couldn't take it anymore. So he'd been literally taken when he was 4 or 5, kept by this guy, abused by him and his buddies, part of this, trading of kids. And these kids don't get education most of the time. They're just basically kept like little slaves during the day if they're not locked up in cages. And the ironic thing is, this guy, it was on the national news. He actually was running a pizza parlor, and his biggest guests were the local police. And people were even reporting, going, hey, this guy's never been married and he doesn't have any kids. Doesn't anybody want to look into the fact that why is there this kid that's staying there and he's saying it's his kid, and then he says it's his brother's kid, but little other kids would show up and then disappear? So, neighbors, some people started seeing things, but, the police would say, oh, no, he's our buddy. He's good. He's fine. Don't worry about it. Move along. Time to go on. And it's unbelievable. And we have Pope Ratzi now, who's so tied in Germany and Ireland. I mean, the defender of the faith. I mean, my God, you sit there and you think, I can't believe this guy was actually a goose-stepping, not just Nazi, but SS Nazi. And he was a brown shirt as a kid. This guy was indoctrinated and a total cultist. And he's even come out and said, well, this stuff was misunderstood. Things were different back there. There was sort of a relationship, and it was just a situation. And I'm sitting there thinking, are you out of your mind? And, to sit there and think that, 1 billion Catholics listen to this guy. And I mean, like I said, I went to Roman Catholic schools. I went to Notre Dame High School. I mean, some of the best people I met in my life were some of the nuns who I actually admired. Judith and I talked about that because we even talked about how David Ferry had been a minister at the behest of his family, a priest, and she had actually considered being a nun as well, because it's like you grow up in that culture. It's just sort of, you think about it. But she was attracted for the same reason I was, because when I was growing up, some of the people I admire, besides my mom and dad, a couple of my aunts and uncles, were some of the nuns, because they were doing the real missionary thing. They not only were nurses, they were teachers that cared about you and would stay late and help you with things. Or, if you were a weird kid like me, I was the kid in the math class. I never was good at sitting there doing the rote ones where you just do things, but I was the weird kid that did the bonus word problem all the time that pissed people off. I would ask for it. Is there another one? I like figuring out these little puzzles. And so, these nuns were people I really admired. Of course, it turned out as I got older and I got to know them in high school, too many of them wound up dead by junta death squads in Guatemala and Nicaragua after we trained the people in Honduras to, and here they are, American citizens going down there to help the poorest of the poor down there, trying to teach the kids, be hospital nurses and teachers. Oh, there's a cat in the background. Some of the nuns I knew were ones that actually got wound up being found dead on the side of the road, attacked by these junta people, and it's just amazing. So I don't want to have people think that I'm saying that all the Catholic Church or Catholics specifically either. Like I said, what I uncovered was multidimensional and multi-denomination as well.
Well, of course, because at the core, it's not even really about being a Catholic or any other sort of sect of Christianity or even any religion at all. It's about it's about one religion, I should say, Satanism, and it's about their sick, twisted crap that they do. Ladies and gentlemen, stay right there. We'll be back in a few minutes. Do not change the dial or turn off the flash player in case you're listening on your computer. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Hanging out with Carolyn Goyda. And Carolyn, during the break and off air earlier today, you and I were talking, and you told me the personal price that you've had to pay for all of what you've uncovered and just the sheer thuggery that you've had to deal with. Go ahead and, because we got about 45 minutes left, so go ahead and give the listeners an idea of just the thuggish behavior that you've had to deal with.
Yeah, it gets really interesting, and people do need to know that this really does happen to people. So when people say it to you, don't sit there and think, oh, that shouldn't happen to you, or what did you do to get it to happen to you? Now, a lot of times they're targeting you because they do want to go after people that, if you're somebody in a local area that people do come to, you're seen as somebody that's not willing to play games, because if you're standing up for other people, they've got to make an example of you. And I also did look into things that, made them nervous. And I will say, somebody was asking me in the chat, yeah, I am on Facebook at my whole name, Carolyn Rose Goyda. Like I said, there's over 1,400 photo albums there, and I post probably anywhere between 30 and 100 things every day, and we get into all kinds of discussions, everything from permaculture to we were discussing the USS Liberty, so I try to touch on themes to get people going, and 5,000 incredibly great people internationally. I mean, I have every state in the Union, every province of Canada, every part of the UK, every part of the EU. Oddly enough, every country in the Arab, throughout that whole Middle East region. I have Iranians, Iraqis. When there was things going on in Gaza, I had people at the Jerusalem Post and people in Palestine. At the same time, we had Cynthia McKinney on my page at the same time, talking about what was going on. A bunch of Romanians. I must really attract vampires. I'm a night owl. And everything in Central and South America is represented on my page. Philippines, Korea, Taiwan. We do have some Chinese now. Got a bunch of people in Iceland. Australia, New Zealand is there. Philippines, Indonesia, Japan. So when something happens, that's the one thing I found. And then we were talking about people needing to know things worldwide. And when you say, there is a good thing when you say that worldwide we're the same. We don't need to have one world government or any of that crap. We don't need banksters telling us how to do it. We need local things and credit unions, and we don't need any of these large banks or Federal Reserve type things that are just a scam. But the fact that you get on a place like Facebook or, you know, the chat here, and you find it on Friends of Freeman Agenda. Freeman's a good buddy of mine. The friendshipagenda.com is where he's at. What you find out is, you know, everybody loves their dogs, their cats, their roses, their garden, and people will share recipes. And, you know, we have people on there that, you know, we listen to everything from the Doors one night, and then somebody will put, you know, some concert music, and I've got some real life country guys that are writing real new stuff. I've got a concert pianist that will actually upload real pieces. Sonic, one of the guys on the Friendship, he likes to do the mixing of the things, the sort of, you know, science fiction type music and stuff. So, you know, the world, the people themselves we can get united at the lowest level of just being friends and sharing and that kind of stuff. We just don't need the global elite telling us what to do and, you know, controlling the fund and the fuel and the food. But now back to me. What happened to me, like I said, once I started getting targeted in the area, because after my dad died, I tried to get involved in fighting the municipal ordinance extortion and abuse thing. That attracted me again. And, of course, I was already on the dirt list for looking into the pedophile priest thing, and I had turned the files over to a lawyer who profited very substantially, and that's one of the reasons why you started seeing all these $1 million cases. I was one of the reasons. But trust me, the lawyers kept 99.9% of it, and I got nothing. And the kids that got molested got very little as well. Some of them did all right, but not very few. The lawyers got the lion's share, and that's why they were starting selling things, and it came out. But they want to brush it under the carpet that it's just the priest, and it's not. You know, because then everybody will say, well, it's just because they're celibate. They couldn't control themselves. But I had gotten involved with that. I'd also gotten involved with how they were shutting down the Polish church in St. Louis because they wanted to steal the endowment to help pay off these other things, too. I'll tell you just a little quick, interesting story before I get to the abuse part, is that I went to the Soviet Union on a cultural exchange when Gorbachev was still there. And it was interesting, too, because at the time I was actually working on several projects for McDonnell Douglas, and one of them included Tomahawk, and that is, you know, it is nuclear tipped at times. So here I am, I'm going on this, and they're coming up with a cover story and everything else. And before you go, you find out they know who you are. So all that stuff is bullshit. But I wanted to go over there. I wanted to see what things were for myself, and there were 40 women that went. So, you know, that drove everybody insane anyway. Because they said that of all the groups they've ever had, they could never control women because they try to herd us someplace, and you get 40 women, you get off a bus, they had 40 directions. And none of us listened to what we were told about not taking pictures and everything else. And I got some extraordinary pictures out when I got home. I've got those, and ultimately I'm going to post them up on Facebook. I just haven't gotten them up there yet. But one of the things that I did was we went to Soviet Georgia, so I was through Tbilisi and all these areas that you're hearing about now. It's just amazing to hear this and what's happened to them. But one of the things we attended, because I went with some refuseniks and whatnot too to church, because this one Jewish lady, I didn't want her to have her go by herself. She was scared to death. I thought she was going to get herself killed. Well, a couple other ones wanted to go to some churches. So we went to a Georgian Orthodox church, and they had ripped out all the pews, and they wouldn't have any power. They couldn't have any electric. So these people got together on Sunday, still in their what's left of their beautiful church, and they had candlelight, which was actually kind of pretty. And these people, but what was remarkable was when you were leaving, this was still when it was the Soviet Union, you know, they were taking pictures of everybody so that they could keep track of who was attending church, because remember, under the communists, you couldn't be in the Communist Party if you went to a church, you attended church. So if they found you there, you were thrown out of the party. And here you come back to the United States, you flash over here, and here I am in St. Louis. I went to the Polish church, which the Catholic Church said, okay, you're not going to give us your endowment. We're going to say you're no longer a church. And they screwed up all these people's weddings that had been planned for a year. And that was just making me mad, because I know they had done that to the Ukrainian Catholic Church, but I thought, God, these greedy bastards. And then what really, really ticked me off is they wouldn't even let the old people be buried from this church. Some of them had never been anywhere else. You know, the only church they'd been in as a kid. And some of these people really believe this. And you got to respect it. That's what they believe. They have a right to believe it. And I thought, you arrogant bastards, you won't let these people be buried, even have a funeral mass from their own church. So when they had a midnight mass, they called for everybody to come down there. And a Polish priest volunteered, and he got excommunicated for it. He volunteered to give the midnight mass. And I told my mom, I said, will you stay here? I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to go. And I went down there, and I'll be damned if I'm not walking out of that church. And I even knew some of the seminarians. And these guys were sitting there with police protection, taking pictures of all the Catholics who dared cross the line. And I thought, you know what? We're not all that different, are we? You know, they're going to sit there and photograph and target people for daring to question. And it was no different than what I saw in the Soviet Union. And the police were protecting not the citizens, not telling the priest to go away. They were protecting the priest and the paid photographers who were recording who dared show up for a midnight mass. And I that just totally destroyed my faith in any of these box churches. But as far as back to me, what really accelerated is after my mom died, and she actually died of malpractice in St. Louis University, and it was really horrible, believe it or not. It was actually unscheduled. There's no easy way to say this. She went in there because we were getting death threats like crazy, and on the phone constantly. The police wouldn't do anything about it. We'd started getting swastikas painted on my door. They tried to say I'm a lesbian. I'm not, but they were trying to say, oh, she's not married, she must be, and all. I mean, you know how they're just going to go after you for everything they can. And my mom, you know, she's a tough lady. She says, they're not going to be able to run me out of my house. This is my home. I want to stay here. And we started having dead animals put on our porch. And then, we both got so
I'm going
sick.
to cut you off right there because we're coming up to the break. And
All right.
The listeners are going to have to be, like a cliffhanger. Well, just as she gets into the good stuff, Popeye? Sorry, guys. It's the way it works in live radio. We'll be back in a few minutes. So stay tuned. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. I've already decided, after about the first 20 minutes of Carolyn being on, that obviously one show is not enough to have her on. So I will have her back on within the coming weeks, and I'm actually going to have her on. I'm going to try to bring her on, if she can, at least like once a month. That way she can, update and stuff and let the listeners know what's going on, as well as get into, just the tons of research that she's done. Because her and I were, talking off hour. We got into a conversation, and next thing I know, we were on the call for like an hour and a half. It was amazing. We were chatting, and it was just, her head is so filled with information about things, and a lot of it is the dirty stuff that no one wants to talk about. And you all know that that's one of the things I specialize in, is exposing the pus-filled wounds and cleaning them out so that we can, disinfect it and move on. It's the only way we can deal with this stuff. And a lot of people don't talk about this stuff. And I consider myself lucky to have met you, Carolyn, because you really are a fountain of information, and you have the balls and the courage to talk about it. It's hard to find people that are willing to talk about this stuff with me on air. Not many people, Bob Tuskin's one of the only other people, Mark Passio, there are people that will touch on it, but they don't like to, you know what I mean? They skim the surface, whereas you have to get into it. Now, getting back into it, just before you got cut off by the break, you were saying you were getting into the stuff that was done to you, and the creepy and horrible things that were done to you and your pets and your family. So go ahead. You were saying that they had started attacking your animals and then went to break. So go ahead and pick up right there.
Right, and you mentioned other places. There is a Friend of Freeman show on Freeman's page where we did a couple hours too, where we got into the same stuff. So if anybody wants to find it over there, if you just go on my Facebook page, and you can. There's links to all that stuff in one of the photo albums. But yeah, what started to happen, you start to tell people this stuff, and they shake their head because they don't want to believe it, because you can't even make up some of this stuff. Because it's, people say, well, they can't do that to you. It's illegal or something else. But, we started with the death threats, with the Nazi things and whatnot. And then one of the strangest thing, and I've talked to Hutch about this, John Hutchinson, we've been trying to figure out exactly what was done, was one of the first things that was strange that started happening to our house was all the batteries in our house started leaking. Now, you tell people that and they think you're nuts. But you're talking about a watch, you're talking about a flashlight, you're talking about picking up your remote and it's leaking on you. I had at the time a Subaru Forester, built in Indiana, by the way, by Americans. I loved that car. It was actually I got a picture of it on my Facebook thing. It was actually painted like a tie-dyed shirt. I did that one night after a six-pack, and I explained why. It was a trip back, and it was a black one, and I had to change the color. It was starting to look like a hearse. But that battery's in the vehicle, actually, They had to replace it 6 times in 3 months. And Subaru went through all the wiring. AAA went through all the wiring. They said they'd never seen anything like this before. And you know, the coins in my house were all tarnishing out of nowhere. So something was being done while we're getting the death threats. And my mom and I both got sick. My feet got so big they looked like flippers. And my poor mom actually started having circulation problems in her legs too. But being elderly and she was already in her late 80s, it was the opposite. Mine was swelling. Her veins were starting to collapse. And she did not start out having anything wrong with her. She was incredibly healthy. My grandma lived to 104. My doctor and everybody even assumed my mother was going to live at least another 10 years. We had the first of, while the batteries were having the problem, we had the first of 7 animals in a 3-year period get cancer out of nowhere when all of our animals had lived, the natural causes 15, 20 years, whatever. And we didn't have all 7 at the same time, but the first cat got cancer. And we wound up having a total of 7 of them get cancer in 3 years. I brought them down to Mizzou. They were all autopsy. They said this is the odds of this happening in a small area, unrelated animals. The fast way these cancers killed these cats. I got a touch of skin cancer. Like I said, we started having the circulation problems, and I lost my mom right after it was when the big tsunami was in Indonesia. Out of nowhere, my mom all of a sudden had more problems. Same time I did. Same time the cat started bleeding out of her nipple. I didn't even know cats could get breast cancer. But I'm dealing with that. My mom gets sick. And of all strange things, her doctor gets sent, and I'm not making this up. The Pope was dying at the time. Her doctor was an incredible guy that picked up my mom and dad as doctors when nobody else would help me keep them at home, because that's what I owed my dad, and that's what I wanted to do for my mom. Dr. Flaherty was his name. So he's not a particularly religious person, but his family is. And, you know, good Irish boy. Well, he all of a sudden out of nowhere gets an invite. I mean, there's a million doctors over there. He gets an invite to give a presentation. He was a wonderful geriatric doctor, but to give a speech in Rome, and he's going to consult on the frickin' Pope, who's going to die anyway. You know, like they needed him over there like crazy. There's probably about 8,000 doctors there. So the very day my mom has to go in the hospital for emergency, out of nowhere, he's catching a plane and calls me from the airport. And he's like, well, wait a minute, what's wrong? I just saw her. He literally had just seen her 3 days before. And it's like, he's like, well, she can't be this bad. And I said, no, I think she's in defib. And I'd seen enough. And I said, I really do. And I said, I normally can handle anything, but I said, I can't handle this. I mean, I don't have a heart machine here. And so we wound up going, of all places, what he was attached to, and everybody's going to love this, it was St. Louis University, nice Jesuitly run St. Louis University. But by this time, the hospital had been sold to tenant. To make a long story short, without going into all the detail, my mother wound up dying of malpractice because I actually had left her alone for a short time, and I am not making this up. I get a call back at the house. I'm checking on the cat, which ultimately died as well. I was going to shower, get coffee, come back, and this was like at 4 o'clock in the morning when I left the hospital. Everything had been happening wrong at the hospital, so they kept losing her, moving her every time I left. That could take another 2-hour show, just that. But this is difficult for me to say. I actually came back in. They told me they had to do this as an emergency, and I'm not kidding you. They had one time said that if the circulation problem, she might lose a toe because of some collapsed veins. And we had decided her doctor was coming back on Monday, and this was like Wednesday or Thursday. There was no reason to rush for any of this. She was doing fine. She was eating. First, they gave her a shot that sent her, almost killed her. They had to give her Narcoleptic to bring her back. So here she is. She's not strong enough. They drag her in to do surgery. She's in there for 5 or 6 hours. I have no idea what's going on. I'm trying to find out, trying to get in there. I walk up to her room because they said, oh, we brought her back to recovery. You can find her. I came walking into the room, and she had 4 inches of her leg left. And her leg was still even open. And I literally walked into this and almost fell over. I mean, to this day, I still have nightmares of that scene. And the horror look on her face when she woke up that way. And, I mean, she ultimately died because I'll be honest with you, she gave up after that. But the personal attacks from the day she was buried, and she was buried in Jefferson Barracks next to my dad, who, like I said, he was a very brave man. He was decorated on D-Day. He was in Jefferson Barracks, so she was buried in there. I literally got home still in the outfit I'd worn at the cemetery. And here I walk, the phone rings, and it's one of the people in the neighborhood who I didn't know well, but I'd been warned that she was upset with me protecting other people and getting involved. And I get a phone call saying, "Oh, Carolyn, I saw your mother's death notice in the paper." And I said, "Oh, well, yeah, thanks for calling. I just got back." She was, "Oh, yeah, I saw you pull up. I just want to let you know that we've talked about you, and now that she's dead, we're glad she's dead, and you either got to move or we're going to make sure you're next." And I'm not making this up. The woman, I never even met the woman. I like, what the hell did I do? Cut you off on the highway? You having a bad day going through menopause? What the hell is your problem, lady? You know, and she just said, she goes, "No, we don't want you in our neighborhood. We don't want activists. We don't want troublemakers here. You don't fit in." And I'm like, wait a minute. I've lived here my whole life. You've moved here, what, 18 months ago? And you
Or was she a yuppie?
Well, what she was, it turns out, she was kind of a tramp anyway. Her name is Janice Liberty, of all things. And I'll say her name. I've got no problem. And believe it or not, though, she works for Armstrong Teasdale, which was the largest law firm and the official law firm of St. Louis County. And the reason I don't really care about anybody's choices as to their personal life. She was single, but she was with nothing but married men. It was basically the lawyers in the law firm. And it got to be a joke in the neighborhood because instead of parking in her driveway, we always knew there was something fishy because they knew to not park in her driveway. If they were going to spend the night, they were down the block or a couple of houses down. You know how you don't want to have
She was a slut.
Yeah, basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and proud of it, too, because she'd brag about her connections. And I actually, after getting several death threats from her over the next couple of days, I had the phone checked for a friend and found out where it was coming from. And it was this law firm. She was calling from the law firm. And I actually called the law firm up. And at the time, I was still pretty much in shock, to be honest. Because I didn't expect my mom to die, okay, the way it was. And certainly not the way she did. And I was feeling a great deal of guilt over not being able to protect her. And so the law firm looked it up and they were able to prove it. Because I said, "Hey, is she representing you or are you representing her? Because she's giving me death threats and I want this dealt with." And I should have been really...
That's the music. Yeah, that's the last break coming up. Okay. I'm gonna cut you off again, but it's just, see, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I brought Carolyn on, because it's when you research her story too, it's true. It's not like she's making any of this up. It's even worse. You know, I wish she was lying, but she's not. So it's that screwed up. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back for the final segment, and as always, whenever I have a awesome guest on with an incredible story or incredible information, time just goes by like that. So I promise I will have Carolyn back on. Carolyn, real quick, tell the listeners again where they can see you on Facebook or where they can hear you when you go on the air and stuff. I'm sure that they're biting at their fingernails in anticipation of hearing more, and we're obviously not going to have enough time to fit it all in today. So where can they check you out? Do you have any archives or anything where they can listen to your older shows?
Okay, most of them are on. I've got them as various photo albums right now on the Facebook. I'm just kind of using that for my central thing now because I've got a web page that I'm working on, but I don't have it up yet. Tomorrow we're going to be on the Type 1 radio agenda on Blog Talk. There's going to be, if you go to the Facebook page, you'll find I always make a photo album for the shows, and we're doing a little bit more about Judith and also the Bush connection to the JFK assassination. And a lot of people still don't know that, so we're still trying to get some information out to a lot of people on that. And that right now, and Freeman, of course, shows on Saturday, and Freighter X has a show on Saturday as well. Sometimes I'm on there. But I will be having my own show probably starting in January. But my biggest thing now is trying to sell my house because we'll get into that. That's part of the abuse that they won't let me even sell my house. I can't live in it. I can't rent it. I can't sell it. So they basically have made me cash broke living in hotels and whatnot. But if you go to Facebook, you can find it there. And tomorrow we will be on at 1:00 in the afternoon because, we have a lot of international people. So they'll be available. And it is an international group. It's called the Type 1 Radio Lounge. And on Saturdays, we're on all the time, and it's very relaxed. So it's just like a chat room. We talk about everything and share information. And, if we're going to have a topic, we post that as well. And Sonic, and there's a whole bunch of other great guys on there. And Eddie Dudek is a friend that's helping, and Jay Larson does a lot of work, and Fichek and Steve Gaddafi, all these guys. It's a really good group of people. So everybody's welcome, and everybody's allowed to talk. We had Judy Wood on, and anybody could call in and talk to her direct. So, I mean, it was like, we get people up there, and we let you talk to them right to their face. So it's like, you want to call them something, you want to deal with it, it's right there. Because if you're going to come on the show, you got to be willing to talk to anybody. We're not going to have you come on and be obscene.
That's pretty cool that you let the listeners, you can patch them in and they can talk to the guests. That's pretty cool.
I'm surprised Judy didn't have a heart attack.
Well, yeah, I've got. We can talk about that in another show too.
I'm sure we can.
Well,
we only have a few minutes left, so do you have any questions you want to ask Carolyn at all, Bob?
No, I don't. I'd just like to thank her for all that she's doing and tell her to keep up the good work.
Well, you know what? People, if you want to pay attention, you might be able to actually help me, because I'm in the middle now that, when I went back in 2009 to actually sell my house, I had a buyer, I had a new place to go, I even had a PhD lined up to get at Mizzou, I had a job, I had all kinds of stuff, the pond where I was going to live at Blue Heron and Swan, I had free horses from some friends ready to go. I was basically putting my tail between my legs, but I couldn't live there anymore because, to make a long story short, I'd gotten attacked in the house, I got raped for 18 hours, they strangled one of the calves in front of me, obviously no one was prosecuted. The police tried to break down my door without a warrant, without a citation, without any justification. They were there for 35 minutes. If I didn't have all the deadbolts, they would have gotten in. Nothing was done to them for doing that. All they said was, "Oh, sorry, wrong house." When I went back to move, first thing they did was they arrested me and held me in jail for 3 days. And then they said, "Oh, sorry, that was another mistake. There is nothing. We're not charging you with anything." But in the meantime, my U-Haul got totally ripped off of everything. I've had the police go through my storage units and take everything. And right now I've been living in hotels for 2 years. So I'll be honest, I'm actually cash broke right now. I'm selling my life insurance policies. I've already cashed in the IRA. And I really seriously had enough money to retire between 2005, 2009. And now, which is fine. I'll work the rest of my life. I got no problem. I could have taken full disability in my 20s when I had detached retinal surgery, and I was offered full disability. And I said, disability is for people that can't work. And I figured my brain was still working. I'd find a way to work. And then I'm glad I did, because I actually got most of my eyesight back by using it instead of, laying around doing nothing. But yeah, I'm going to actually be posting on Facebook, because about 3 weeks ago, they did another assault on my home and basically killed an awful lot of what I had as my garden and stuff, and everything from Siberian kiwi to heritage roses that were irreplaceable. And what helped stop what they were doing was I got on Facebook and asked everybody and said, "Hey, here's some names and numbers." And they got 2,000 between faxes, emails, and it got them to at least physically stop what they were doing. And in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have to do it again, because they won't give me the permit to sell. They will not give me the permit to rent. They will not let me live there.
And just so people are clear, it's the city, right? The city of St. Louis won't allow you to sell your house?
It's St. Louis County. Now, there's a difference. St. Louis City is different. And Mayor Slay, I actually know him. St. Louis County is Democratic run, but it doesn't matter. It's a two-party crime syndicate that we deal with. And it's been Democrat forever, but it's just the machines. I mean, anybody in power just joins the same thing. And what these guys are doing, because they actually have a goon squad, and this is what people need to watch out for, because the goon squads tend to be these municipal ordinance cops that have all the authority, and they got guns and tasers. They can throw you away. They can do what they want, because they all believe they have the Unpatriot Act on their side, and all the cops will tell you to your face. They believe they can lie now. They think that's part of their shtick. And they think they can, you can disappear. That hey, from the top down, everybody said it's okay to render people and do stuff, and they honestly do believe they have the right. The ends justify the means, that they can do what they want to you. And you got to really watch out for these civilian police academies, because they're basically like little Nazi outfits. That they tell people, "Oh, you need to come and learn more about it. And we'll semi-deputize you." And what they're doing is they're getting these people to be willing to be little brown shirts, basically, and run around, and the anonymous hotlines are growing, and then that's what they use, because they would come to my house and say, "Well, we had an anonymous tip, we had to come here." They would go to my public storage unit and say, "We had an anonymous tip," and and it's basically throwing out all the rights that you have a right to face your accuser. And that we can get in another show. We'll have to talk about the kangaroo court they brought me to. They were going to threaten me with a year in jail, because there's actually a warrant for my arrest. I'm a really dangerous fugitive. They have issued a warrant, I'm not kidding you, for my arrest for lawn care maintenance ordinance violation. And they have threatened, what if I come back to St. Louis County, I will be arrested and jailed. And to my face, the last county the ordinance cop I talked to said that they will get me in jail, and this time I will not come out alive. And I actually was given, when I left, 2 hours to leave my home. They put an order to vacate without a hearing, without a notice. I was told I had 2 hours. They were going to come back, drag me out by my hair, kill my pets in front of me and burned my house down. And I'll be honest with you, I believed it. I really did. I took 2 hours through everything in a van at this time because the Subaru had been totaled. They made sure that was gone, and I basically had to haul butt and had nowhere where I was going. And so that can take a whole story just telling you where I've been the last 2 years, because it really is a Stephen King novel, and I think it's more of a sitcom because you got to find the humor in this stuff too. But they actually quoted a United Nations ordinance. They were citing a United Nations ordinance was the rule they were using to order me out of my house. And then I've talked to even St. Louis County judges that have told me, they said, my God, this is just absolute civil rights violation. You've got a case. But the hard thing for an average citizen to do is you try to get lawyers to defend you. And the ones that are involved, that they're already hooked into these municipal courts, they make so much money off of these. You know, they put up these road stops now, and they call them drunken driving. Moms are worried about drunks. Yeah. No, that's a way to intimidate people and to get people used to saying, you know, show me your papers, please. And they cite people because it's a profitable thing. I got in trouble because Paul Harvey used another story I did, which was basically showing how St. Louis County police had become mercenaries. They were basically becoming a larger and larger police force, and they were being, you know, farmed out to these little tiny nearby municipalities and basically just being ticket writers. But you know, they were making a ton of money for the municipalities. They were making money for St. Louis County. And that's basically what most of these ordinances are being used. They're used to extort money from you. I had one of the municipal ordinance cops come to my house and wanted me to have his buddy cut down a tree. I mean, this guy was a buffoon with a pickup truck and a chainsaw. And I even asked him, I said, did you ever cut anything down in your life? And he says, well, I just got this chainsaw. I think I can figure this out. And I'm like, holy crap. And it's like, you know, and I
now that's the good old boy network. That's the good old boy network right there.
I've even got it in writing. That this guy they're so arrogant and feel so confident. I was able to get this cop to put in writing, one, that they had stormed my house, because I said, I need this before I leave, you know, and I got him to do this. And I even have him in writing where he admitted telling me I had to give him $550 to have his buddy cut my tree down. I mean, I've got the evidence to put these
Boss Hog Network at its finest, Carolyn. That's what it sounds like. It's the Boss Hog Network at its finest. We have about a minute and a half before the end of the show. I got to tell you, again, 2 hours is not enough time, ladies and gentlemen. Carolyn, as soon as I can, you know, schedule you off air, we'll schedule. I'm going to get you back on the show and get you some more airtime because. You know, your story in itself is incredible, let alone, you know, the stuff that you've done, Earth, and the research. And, you know, you and I could sit and talk about Kennedy, you know, by itself. And ladies and gentlemen, Carolyn's a smart lady. She knows all about the Vatican. She knows the Jesuits, the Black Pope. This is one woman I would tell you that you need, if you get a chance to listen to any of the shows that she does or anything like that, I suggest that you go check it out. They are important. I suggest you check her out on Facebook. Carolyn, thanks for coming on and hanging out. I want to give Bob Tuskin a big thanks for hanging out with me for the first couple segments and helping me out with some behind-the-scenes stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, have a happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe. And stay tuned for tomorrow because Joe, Joseph, and I have something special planned. Special Thanksgiving show. I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.